Good afternoon, or good morning still. Welcome. My name is Pamela Puchalski, and I'll be moderating today's session on urban India. I want to start by first saying thank you to the New Cities Foundation for hosting the summit, inviting me to organize the session with our distinguished panelists. One background word on what is Citywalla. I've learned this term. It's a new term. For me, it has two meanings. It's a Hindu term with Urdu roots, and it most commonly used to refer to a seller or a vendor. So you would have a taxiwalla, taxi driver. But it's also used in the term of city dweller, so a Mumbai-walla or a Delhi-walla. So in this context, it'll set the stage for us to have a deep conversation about the characteristics of urban India, its dynamics of growth, its socioeconomic characteristics, its political, cultural, environmental dynamics. We know that cities have long been the stage where the world's conflicts play out, environmental, economic, social, and political. They're also places of opportunity and innovation. And with our panelists today, we're going to understand exactly how that innovation and those opportunities are defining the future of India. A little bit of stats and information, background for you. We know that 1/10 of the world's urban population live in an Indian city. But India is only 28% urbanized. Recent projections for growth that India will be 40% urbanized by 2030. This compares to 60% in China. So the growth patterns that we'll see in urban India will be the focus of this the next defining years of the 21st century. We heard earlier this morning that India is set to add almost 500 million new residents to its cities by 2050. Meanwhile, contextualizing this with India's growth is really the key issue, its economic growth. How to build the capacity for infrastructure, education, housing, and address environmental issues. Today, we'd like to get to the granularity of some of the topics we heard in the opening session in these broad strokes that were referred to as urban India. The real focus of today's conversation is to look at the structure of partnerships that are defining the future of urban India. How government is working together with businesses, civil society, and research institutions. And within this context, we'll look very closely at the issue of urban governance, not government in the dysfunctional way that it was referred to this morning, but how there's a cooperation and a collaborative framework. We will also talk about the critical role of India's informal sector and how issues of capacity to finance, plan, implement, and manage are really the key questions at the forefront for India's cities today. We'll look very closely at innovation, knowledge sharing, and models for growth, and touch in some part on the impact of technology on India's cities, and most importantly, the importance of civic engagement and quality of life issues. And with this, I turn it over to Manjeet Kripalani, the Executive Director and founder of Gateway House, the Indian Council on Global Relations, to give us an opening preview of what the work that they're doing and what are the conditions of innovation in urban India today.
Thanks, Pamela. Can you all hear? Yes. Thank you. I'm Manjeet Kripalani. Gateway House is a foreign policy think tank based out of Mumbai. We are the first in the city, definitely, and perhaps the only private and independently funded privately funded think tank in the city. We sit at the intersection of business and foreign policy precisely because business in India has been leading diplomacy for a long time, and it's never really been leveraged. Neither does business leverage it, nor does government leverage it. And this filters down to every aspect, particularly to areas of innovation. One of the things that we're doing is we work on many geopolitical, geoeconomic issues, but we also look at the city. We have a focus on the city of Mumbai, and we have found through the course of our research that there are certain peculiarities to innovation in emerging markets cities. And Bombay is a sort of a microcosm of of cities and emerging markets around the world. In all developing countries and the small emerging markets, cities, they tend to have one or two big cities, except for the BRICS countries, which are large. They tend to have one or two maximum big cities, and all the talent in the country aggregates in these cities. And so urban centers have become the aggregators of talent, a country's talent, in emerging markets around the world. So these become fertile ground also for innovations in cities. The density and the unique conditions of these urban centers encourages and incubates innovations that are responses to service and product gaps. But they also have relevance to, as I said, emerging markets across the road, and particularly to small niches in developing economies. And now that you've got the world in a sort of a recession, sometimes it becomes more important to be low-tech than to be high-tech, because that works across a swath of people and masses, people who can afford things better. One of the things that India does, and it does this across everything, credit, lending, products, services, it has adopted something called the AAA credo. And AAA stands for affordability, adaptability, and appropriateness. So innovations have to be all of the above, AAA. The peculiar thing about Bombay, and it is also, this also is the same for Singapore, is that Bombay is, unlike Delhi, where the center of the city is pristine and all the slums are very far away. In cities like Bombay, the slums are right next to the high-rises, and so people's lives are intertwined. And that also leads to different kinds of innovation that is shared by both the high-rises, people in the high-rises, and the slums. And so it creates a very different dynamic from what one is accustomed to. The creativity of people within cities is enormous. And let's just look at Bombay, the microcosm of emerging markets and of India. Bombay has urban density, high population. It has about between 17 and 20 million, we're not quite sure. It is a financial center of India. It's a media center. It has Bollywood. It has technology, manufacturing, inequality, and resource constraints. That means access to clean water, air, land, healthcare, etc. The big companies, so I'm going to divide up the innovation. So you've got big companies like General Electric that are looking at, they have big projects based out in Bombay that are funded by the World Bank. GE is looking at what is called affordable innovation, affordable urbanization. And that's a very, very, very big picture. It involves governments, etc. But in countries like India, which are very democratic, the only thing that really works is a bottom-up innovation. Everything in India is bottom-up. China is top-down. And those are simply facts that works. So innovations that come out of needs, people's needs, citizens' needs, are the ones that are sustainable and robust. Just a small word about India's innovations. India's government hospitals are the ones that provide care to, especially in Bombay, which has a very good system of government hospitals. They provide care to people from all classes, middle class, lower classes, and the very poor. The GE is, I think, experimenting with some of the equipment that they use, because the equipment in government hospitals, believe it or not, are changed every year. They have the absolutely most up-to-date equipment, because the usage is so high that companies actually test it out, use it as a ground for testing out the robustness of their new equipment. So sometimes you will find equipment that is brand new, that is not available anywhere else, which is used in government hospitals in cities like Bombay. The three innovations I'm going to talk about, there are many innovations. There's product innovation in cities, there's process innovations, and there's business models innovations. And these continue forever. I'm just going to start with the PowerPoint. So you've got, the world is full, emerging markets is full of cities. You've got Bombay, population 17 million. You've got Manila, which is just as crowded. You have Sao Paulo, slums, like Bombay, and Jos, which is in Nigeria. these are also cities that need to start developing, and we're going to see more of these slides as we go on. Emerging markets, as the slide says, witness a unique interplay of socio-economic political systems. And I'm going to just go into the slide. So you've got everything from technology, community, gender equality, capital, livelihoods, poverty, talent, pollution, environment, affordability, time, quality, sustainability, security, culture. And innovation in these emerging markets happens at the intersections of all of these. It's very important, gender is a big issue, and as we've heard before in the previous session also, safety, security is a big issue. So we're going to look at some of the innovations here in the city of Mumbai. Affordable, adaptable, and appropriate product innovation. This is, Bombay has the world's oldest stock exchange. It's the Bombay Stock Exchange. And one of the young men that worked in the stock exchange, working on the technology, found that there were a lot of problems with the technology, the exchange technology. And he decided when the time was right to start his own exchange technology. So he started a company called MCX. And this is what it did. It actually started to build the newest and most robust stock exchanges. And it came out of living in an emerging market in Bombay where there are so many distortions. The regulations are good, but not good enough. The broadband is unreliable. There's no 3G, 4G. It's just very, very low and very basic. The power supply is good in Bombay, but sometimes out of the city it just isn't there. So what he did, he started a commodities exchange. It began with a commodities exchange. And he used two different kinds of technology. He used brokerage software and exchange technology, which matches orders to exchanges. They were started about 10 years ago, and at the moment they have 1 million licenses, 200,000 terminals, and they are starting to build exchanges, commodity and other exchanges in second and third tier cities across the country. The government is very unhappy because they think that they're moving so fast that the government regulations just can't keep up, and the government has a lot of, particularly in terms of agricultural commodities, the Indian government has subsidies which distort the system. And the building of these exchanges was overturning the subsidy model, and so it's sort of come to a halt. But in the meanwhile, they have been building exchanges. They took Dubai's gold souk and turned it into Dubai's first gold exchange. They built Singapore's first mercantile exchange. They built an exchange in Bahrain, Hong Kong, and they were asked to do it, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And the latest is Bourse Africa, which is based out of Botswana. It's a commodity exchange that is going to link up several African cities to this bourse and sort of even out and Africa's whole commodities future. As you know, Africa is the biggest supplier of commodities to the world. This is going to light up Africa in a way that nothing else does. And here is the great thing about MCX. It cost them $30 million to build a full exchange, and they can do it in 2 months. They've just got very robust systems. Compared to the New York Stock Exchange, if Bourse Africa had to ask the New York Stock Exchange to build it, it would have cost $200 million. So it's affordable. It's adaptable because they've already used it in India, and Indian conditions are fairly similar to African conditions. It's adaptable, and it's appropriate technology because they build it in a modular fashion, which means that it's an add and subtract as desired. So if it's a brand new exchange and it doesn't have enough money, they can build it slowly and then add on as and how things work. They have something called checks and balances. In a minute, they do 80 checks and balances, determining if the broker has enough assets, etc. Now, in the West, they have the same thing, but MCX will do the checks and balances before the trade actually takes place, and they do an overnight trade because in developed markets, the systems are not that secure, and you can't really carry your risk more than just overnight. So the New York Stock Exchange has 10 checks before the trade and 70 after the trade, because their systems are more secure, and they have a T+2, whereas MCX has a T+0. So this is really the world's newest technology built out of Bombay. The second is a business model innovation, and I'm going to go after the business model innovation, multi-solution business models. You've seen markets. How do you go from a chaotic market like that to something that looks like this? This is actually Paris in the picture. And what you do is, India has had, when the telecom revolution took place, they had little phone booths around the country. And they often gave it out to the poor or to the disabled to operate. When the mobile revolution took place, the kiosks really ran out of things to do, because no one was using the phone, so they started stocking cigarettes and little sweets for children, etc. And it looked really like a shambles. A company called ITC, which is India's largest cigarette company, the Indian Tobacco Company, decided that they were moving out of cigarettes, or at least lowering their dependence on cigarettes into things like biscuits, small sweets, cakes, etc. Small confectionaries for the Indian low-end market. And because they needed to sell more than cigarettes, they decided to upgrade these kiosks around the city. So they tried in the city of Bombay, and they've moved it across the city. And all of a sudden, the poor operator, had a really nice-looking kiosk with proper shelving, because you've got potato chips, they need different shelvings, biscuits, cigarettes, little medicines, even condoms that they were selling from the street corner. So all of a sudden, these shambolic-looking structures on the street corner started to look very gentrified. And all this was at no cost whatsoever to the operator. It gave them a new life, new source of income, and it started making the city look a little better. Yeah. And the final one is obstacle-borne process innovation, which is a doorstep school. This is a school it's a bus, actually, with a teacher and two teachers and a supervisor, started by a lady in 1998, where street children couldn't really study in open places. It was too distracting, and they couldn't stay in a regular school. So one of the ladies who observed this, decided to start a school in a bus. They take primary children from ages from standard 1 to 4 and teach them enough that they can read and write. They teach them not just schooling, but also hygiene and socialization habits. And it's been hugely successful. They can now read and write. 10% of the children actually go on to middle school, which is a huge number. And it costs half of what government schooling does. So it's now started in 4 cities in Bombay, and they've got 3 different places in Bombay, in 4 cities in India: Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, and Hyderabad, and 3 other areas in Bombay where the school goes. We are trying to actually capture this in our study, in our index. And one of the things that we want to say is that the policy discourse is too polarized just now. The Indian government really doesn't look at things in a holistic manner. And so the doorstep school, in fact, should be part of the national innovation initiative, instead of which it's getting stuck in an outpost in the NGO world, instead of being really part of the innovation and education system. So that's really it. We're full of these innovations, and you will see it in an upcoming study, hopefully by the end of the year.
Thank you, Manjeet. We're next going to hear from Ravichandar, who is the founder of something very impressive called the City Connect model. He will explain that to you. But he does this in kind of his offline duties. He's actually the chairman of Feedback Consulting, a leading research and consulting firm in India. So, Ravi, if you could explain to us what City Connect is and how it works.
Sure, Pamela. Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I have a Jekyll and a Hyde character. The Jekyll character does work in research and consulting. That's my day job. I have this other Hyde character for the last 12 years, which works with government, gets into the belly of the beast, and still lives to fight another day. So I'm here really to talk about the kind of stuff that one has attempted and is I'm in the process of attempting in the space of building partnerships between government, industry, civil society for better outcomes in Indian cities. So that's really what I'm here about. As Pamela mentioned, it's about the idea of City Connect. It's something that one has been evangelizing since 2006, and we currently have it in 3 cities, in Bangalore, Chennai, and Pune. But just to step back, I got into this whole idea of City Connect back in 2000 when the state government, I live in Bangalore, it's part of Karnataka, and the chief minister set up a task force calling 4 or 5 people from the private sector and said, hey guys, can you help provide us a report in 3 months on how to fix Bangalore city? And the 4 of us who worked with the government, instead of giving a report at the end of 3 months, we worked with the system for 4 years, which really meant sitting with government departments and officers, walking the streets, trying to get a sense of what the challenges are there at the ground level. And that really gave us a worm's eye view of what the problem with Indian cities are. I'll come to what I learned from there. Back in 2005, the same group also, after that closed down, the task force, went out and helped construct, evangelize the idea of a national urban renewal mission at the federal government level, which is a $12 billion project of the government of India. And that was evangelized by a group of us who had done this work for 4 years in Bangalore. And it has a mixed record in terms of how it's rolled out, but one managed to make that happen. Then come 2006, I was just trying to think about this whole space, and I realized that one very influential stakeholder in the city space has not come to the urban governance party, and that is industry. If you look at the behavior of industry, they typically are in a trade union mode. They're telling government of the day, make my city work, I'm creating jobs, I could do much more, but the place doesn't work, the infrastructure doesn't work, make it happen. But that I call it akin to irresponsible trade unionism, because the challenges for government to make a city work are huge. And I don't think people in the private sector have a sense of the kind of challenges that this group is grappling with. And therefore, to expect this to get magically fixed was not going to happen. In fact, my learning towards the earlier years, between 2000 and 2004, I spent close to 2 to 3 years working with government departments. I realized, forget about the corruption and the lack of commitment in government, the competency and the capability within government did not exist. A city like Bangalore, which everyone considers a Silicon city, does not have a qualified urban planner in government. There are urban planners outside of government who might get hired, but the government system does not have a single qualified urban planner. So how are you going to fix the cities of tomorrow if the ability to think about what it takes to do a city of tomorrow is absent? Government agencies tend to work in silos. The concept of integrating for outcomes, which is so common in the private sector, doesn't exist in government. Government is all about millions of dollars of some projects and schemes, but no one talks outcome. And they talk about, this is my department, that's that department. No one talks about how does it finally come together for the end citizens. That's another thing that one realized. And given this kind of problems that government have, what I realized is that unless we find a way to collaborate between the various stakeholders in a city, cities in India at least are not going to get fixed. We also have a very dysfunctional governance system. Other countries too have the same problem. So typically the cities come under the state government, which is the second tier of government. The third tier of local government exists. We have 200 corporators, for example, in a city like Bangalore, but they have no power. The mayor of Bangalore, 99.99% of Bangaloreans won't know who he or she is. They have no power. The power vests with the state government, and the federal government is in a detached mode saying this is a state subject. So you have a very dysfunctional governance system. So if you have to try and fix this, you need to get industry to in some way get engaged in this space. So the kind of storytelling that one has embarked on over the last 5 years is to scare industry big time. Because industry expects cities to get magically fixed. So one tells them, puts a mirror out there and say, it's not going to fix. Have a look at yourself. It's not going to get fixed. It's going to get worse. The problems of Indian cities, which are growing so rapidly, forget about the 400 million numbers. In essence, the kind of migration and problems would have tested the best and brightest talent in the world to manage those cities. And just think of, on that you overlay a situation where we have dysfunctional governance systems, and not so able managers, and you have a prescription for disaster that we see on our streets on a day-to-day basis. So the case to get in business involved is the following. The construct is as follows, which we have adopted, and it's there in 3 cities now. If a city doesn't work, business will suffer. I want businesses' involvement because it makes good business sense to get involved. Getting involved in a city, we tell businesses, is as important as the time you spend in raw material, process, talent, etc. It is not CSR. It is not a good thing to do as a corporate social responsibility. It goes to the core of your business. If a city worked, your top lines will be better, your bottom lines will be better, productivity will be better, spouses will be happier, children will be happier, and that is why you need to get involved in this space. And we are not asking you to get involved for some CSR or philanthropic reasons, but because it makes good business sense. Then the question shifts to, okay, even if I do decide to get engaged, how do I get involved? And that's really where the City Connect platform comes in. So the City Connect platform is basically catalyzed by industry, which has money and has vested interest in making the city better. But what gets done on the platform is an inclusive idea that you try to fix the city for everyone. It is as important that the domestic worker who comes to work, the city needs to work for that person, even if business is to gain. Because you could have the most productive employee in the company, but if that person's domestic help doesn't come at the doorstep at 7 in the morning, that person is a disturbed person that day and is not going to be productive. Therefore, you have to be interested in how the domestic worker's life in a city works. And when you go back a bit earlier, you'll see at 2 o'clock in the morning, she was waiting to collect water in her slum to be able to come at 7 o'clock, and the water was not coming. So we are so intertwined that people need to realize that if the city doesn't work for all, we are in a collective hellhole, and we're going to be in deep trouble if we don't do something about it. So business on the platform catalyzes this and works with government, both local and state government, on specifically identified projects that help improve the quality of life, or the quality of living, as I like to call it, is basically the heart of the idea. So the question is, what can such a platform bring to such a partnership? The key thing it can bring is urban expertise. So for example, in the 3 cities we run it, we have a bunch of urban professionals paid for by government, paid for by the private sector, and brought to government free of charge. Our whole idea is today, we are badly implementing a terrible plan. Step 1, can we badly implement a good plan? Step 2, we then better implement a good plan. I mean, that's really how I see this whole journey taking place. We're very pragmatic about what we can do. So really, what we can bring to the table is urban expertise, proof of concept, angel projects, pilot funding. But the serious heavy lifting and spending in this partnership is done by the government of the day, because they are the ones with the taxpayers' money and the custodian. So the contract with government, if I can call it that, is the following. We put up our hand and say, look, we have opened shop. It's an a la carte thing. We're willing to work. You want to work in water? We'll work in water. You want to work in traffic? We're happy to work in traffic. You decide. You're the elected people. We are ready to work. We bring expertise to the table. We bring volunteer energy to the table to work on these projects. But what you need to do from your side is you got to give us space at that table to work alongside with you. 2, you will spend and do the heavy lifting of all the serious spends on the projects that get conceived on this platform jointly. So that's the heart of the City Connect idea. In Bangalore, we have been around for about 6 years. We've done about 8 to 10 projects. I mean, time does not permit to get into the specifics. And we have done this by raising close to about $200,000 over the last 6 years. And that's all it takes to run these kind of projects. I mean, typically it takes about $50,000 to $75,000 per annum to have these urban professionals who can work on projects, and we can start seeing better outcomes. And it's a virtuous cycle. If people see the benefit of what's happening, then they're ready to pump in more money, more projects can get done with government. So it started in Bangalore, then I went and evangelized this idea in Chennai. And so we now have a Chennai City Connect, and last year we have a Pune City Connect. One has gone to 15 other cities across the country to try and talk about it. It takes about 1.5 to 2 years from the time you talk about the idea to get a core group of 4 to 5 people who get it and are willing to champion it. Because City Connect has another core idea in its kernel. Problems of Indian cities are common, solution sets are reasonably well known, but you need local initiative to fix it. Bangalore needs to find its own destiny, Pune needs to find its own destiny. What's good for Pune is not necessarily what's good for Bangalore. That the locals have to do. So you need the local initiative to make this happen. And our really dream is in about 15, 20 years' time, and all the people who get involved in this, and these are captains of industry, I said I want a minimum of 10 years of your time. It's not going to work in terms of, as a hobby, you just get involved in this subject. You can spend limited time, but you're going to engage with the idea for over a decade at least if you're going to see change. So that's briefly the idea of what it's a work in progress. The jury's out in terms of whether this will work or not. But we're already cross-pollinating. So if Bangalore has done a road manual, the first of its kind in the country, that's being made available to the other cities so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the whole idea is it's a win-win situation if we can collaborate together. We can use other platforms to bash each other up because those platforms are necessary also. But on the City Connect platform, we are all in a collective hellhole together. Can we work together to start making change in specific areas of the city?
Thank you, Ravi. That's great. Thank you. We will next hear from Annat Jain, who is the managing partner of Acropolis Capital Group. Acropolis has partnered with a consortium of actors, and you are going to describe to us your first project that you're launching in Gurgaon. Annat.
Sure. Thank you, Pamela. Why don't I just, I come from a slightly different perspective, given that our work is all private sector and investment driven. So just a quick framework of what we do. We are presently in the middle of a construction work order. We have invested in and own one of the larger construction companies in India, and we are presently doing a build out in 214 cities, in which in each city we're constructing 150 to 175 acre, what they call a township, which is essentially a large subdivision. Apart from this, which is really a construction contract, we are also developing a large by subdivision standards, a 200 acre luxury housing community outside of Delhi. So we have a pretty, I would say, a ground level perspective on what it takes to get things done in India. And the basic learnings, I'll just share some of the learnings, is that, for all things said and done, India is highly over-regulated in the sense, anything, if you want to find a law, then it exists. For any arcane policy matter, it exists. At the same time, it is badly administered, partly because on a per capita basis, the number of administrators is very low. So for example, the number of policemen per capita, judges, firemen, hospital administrators, et cetera, are so low so as to be a very apathetic number. But the third layer on top of this is that the enforcement of the existing law by these bad administrators is terrible, right? And that's either, and one can get into a large socioeconomic conversation on why that is, on the political economy of motives. But the point is that when you mix all these three things together, it is almost better, and I might get myself in trouble, it's almost better to break the law than to actually follow it in India, all right? So if I'm an investor and I want to make money in the country, it's extremely frustrating to do business in India. And at the same time, we're there, and we make, as a real estate developer, a lot of money doing things which are not rocket science, so to speak. The society should not be rewarding it on that basis. Let me give you an idea. This 200-acre township that we're developing, the total sale proceeds of our project will exceed $2.5 billion over the next 5 years. That's the sale value. We will make, in terms of profit, the consortium of partners will make more than $1 billion of free cash flow, right? That's just from one 200-acre township. And that's for the total number of families living in there will not exceed 1,000, right? Of the 214 townships that we're constructing across country, which is 214 different towns, each town having a minimum population of 50,000, going up to as large as 5 million, right? Even if you put all that together, right, it doesn't, it's a large number for the consortium of partners and owners, but think about the flip side. it doesn't even begin to solve the problem, so to speak, on a grand scale that we hear about for India. For example, the 500 million people moving into cities. I don't know what's going to happen, because Indian cities are really overgrown slums. I mean, they're a terrible place to live in. I'm sorry I say this, but for people who live there, and I happen to be fortunate to live in 1 kilometer from the Delhi Parliament, so I can tell you that everything seems to work. And even then, it's frustrating. And you radiate out of, and I have a very simple view of life, you start radiating out of where the Delhi Parliament is, the Indian Parliament is, and the farther away you go, the faster it collapses. So you can go 5 kilometers out of the Delhi border, and there's no sanitation, water, sewage, power, et cetera, et cetera. So all these great collaborative efforts that Ravi, for example, described, or the great things that Bharati is about to describe, are enormously valuable and required. But how does one make transformative change to address the scale of the problem that exists, right? So I don't know the answer. I can tell you what we're doing, and there are many parties like ourselves. For example, Ajit, the gentleman you heard in the morning, he has a solution, which is a worthwhile solution to consider. Is that the solution? I don't know. I'm sure there'll be many, many models, as the gentleman from Santa Fe said. Let me give you another idea what we are doing right now. We are proposing to one of the large state governments, to a young chief minister, the chief minister of UP, which is a state that has 200 million people. We happen to have a relationship in the sense with the government for various reasons. So now, what we're suggesting is to build a high-speed rail corridor, at least a rail corridor that works, forget the high speed, from the Delhi border all the way to the eastern end of the state, which is 1,100 kilometers, by embanking the largest river in the country, right? And we will build an expressway, we will build a rail corridor, and we will build cities at a scale that can even begin to consider the solution or begin to solve the problem. So cities at the scale of 5, 10, 15 million residents, or at least create the framework for that from land that is created out of nothing, because from the floodplains, because we can create that. Because the opposite, which is to acquire land, is impossible to do, right? So this is something, and the proposition to the state government is that we will finance 100% of that, so you don't put 1 rupee in it, right? Now, what are the challenges? Now, one can keep going down the challenges, because the reason why Indian cities are so dysfunctional is because they don't have the ability to raise money themselves, right? They cannot issue municipal bonds, right? So they can, and even if the government gave them the power to raise the money, given how fiscally responsible the central government is, I shudder to think what would happen if the city debt was also captured on the national balance sheet. Then we would be absolutely bankrupt, as opposed to just nominally bankrupt right now as a country. So the point is, the challenges are, how do you finance a growth like this? And then do you have a policy framework to approach it? And do you have the administrators to govern it? And do you have the enforcement regime to enforce it? And the last 3 things cannot exist until the country, as a whole, begins to solve the problem. Now, one state in India has begun to address some of the problems by, Manjeet and I've spoken about it on various occasions, in the state of Gujarat, which happens to have an able leader. So the positive side is that you can have strong governance and perhaps begin to reap the results in a very concentrated time frame, and that is happening in one state. Is that model replicable across the country? I'm not sure. But one point is the following. Right? The point that we have is the following. That in order to transition from where the country exists to where it needs to in terms of an urban framework, right, there is no thinking going on at any scale which is sufficient to even begin to scratch the surface. Right? And even if there were those thinkings going on, then the ability to create that solution right now is non-existent. And partly because the government in India is fundamentally extractive, right? It doesn't seek to govern, and we know this because we deal with them all the time. So it really exists. I hope there's nobody from the Indian government here. I'm going to be in a terrible mess. So the whole purpose of the governance is, and Ravi may have a different view because he deals with them on a different basis, but our view is, they're ultimate hedge fund managers. You talk to the government, they will strike a deal with you like bam in the next 5 minutes. So it's actually, we don't mind doing business because it is a barrier to entry Is it the desirable barrier to entry? I'm not sure. But the point is that that is partly the reason why it's so hard to do business in India. Let me give one last thing, which is actually, which has just struck me as we were talking about, as Ravi, as you were saying something about Indian industry. See, and this is something that one needs to think about, that the growth of Indian industry in the last 20 years has been largely, if not overwhelmingly, in the services space, right? Now, unless the country creates a light manufacturing framework, you cannot create, even with industry growing, you will not have the positive collateral benefits of what a city really is designed to do, which is create an interactive environment for energy and for thoughts to happen. Because the industry that is evolving lives and makes its money by interacting with an overseas and a global clientele within isolated campuses on internet and telephone. So how does it really create the future of the city in that romantic notion that we understand a city to be a place where great ideas get created, I guess like Soho in London and all the great cities in Western Europe. So that is something that again needs to be figured out. So anyways, the point is that there is, what we are doing is just such a small sliver, and they could be, and there are maybe 100, 200 of the private players like ourselves who are creating solutions, but they're all isolated, small solutions, right? Is there a thinking going on a scale? And is that thinking even desirable? I'm not sure. Maybe this is the best way to do it, and maybe in the end, this organic chaos will result in something desirable.
Excellent. Thank you, Annat. Lastly, we're going to hear from Bharati Chaturvedi. She's an environmentalist and writer and founder of Chintan, Environmental Research and Action Group.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how I actually should be sitting so that I can kind of see the audience.
Careful.
That would be so much worse. So thank you so much for being here. Basically, Chintan, the organization that I work with and I founded, means another way of an alternative perception. And, I'll just give you a kind of context. We started off 11 years ago, 12 years ago, and part of the reason was I felt that how do you actually work solutions without partnerships? Because before that, I was not working like this. I was working as an environmentalist, but not really looking at partnerships. We were activists. And I thought, well, if you don't have mud on your boots, how do you actually figure out what other people want? How do you build consensus? And two pieces of context. I live in Delhi, and like Annat, a kilometer from or less from the Parliament House of India. So that's an extremely privileged part. But in our city, 40% of the people live in slums, and these are not just slums. These are houses made of discarded Coke cartons stitched together. These are places where there's nothing, literally. There's a huge gap, and as we're urbanizing, along with water, along with energy, waste is a huge issue because there's a large and growing middle class which is consuming much more and therefore wasting much more. So from 1993 to 2005, we had more than 100% increase in the amount of plastic waste alone, just to give you a sense of how much more waste there is. On the other hand, we're one of the world's most efficient recyclers. 40%, over 40% of all the waste that is generated is actually recycled, and all of it is recycled by what we call the informal sector, which basically means a bunch of people who are not registered, who are not recognized, and who kind of run their own business. And if you think of it, you can think of it as a pyramid. So the bottom of the pyramid is people who pick trash, because all of us take our trash and we put it out in community spaces from where the municipality takes it away, usually to landfills. And these people will either will go there and pick out the paper and the plastics and the glass and sell it. And that's their livelihood. So can you imagine people, something like in Delhi, 40,000 people, and in India, something like about 1 million people just standing in your trash and picking out things to recycle. The middle of the pyramid is actually the traders. It's the most brilliant entrepreneurial system you can imagine, because they will, the waste pickers and the traders can segregate, paper into as many as 22, 23 categories, so that it can be, and most of them are illiterate, but it can reach the perfect plant, perfectly recycled. And then right on top are people actually reprocessing it and making plastic bags and suitcases and whatever. So what I'm trying to say is that it's an occupation which is the only recycling system we have. It's hazardous because, as you can imagine, if you're going to pick through somebody's trash just like that, which is not separated, it is hazardous. We found in a study that there was more greenhouse gas emissions being avoided by this sector than any single solid waste management project in India that was getting carbon credits. So we're finding actually that this sector is actually our foot soldiers for climate change, but we don't recognize it because, on the other hand, this sector is completely marginal. Many of them actually do work a kilometer from the Parliament House, and they have no water, they have no electricity. The police takes money from them just to walk on the streets. And above all, they're considered polluted people because their occupation is dirty. And so that image of dirt is reflected onto who they are. So Chintan's job is, what we say is that we are converting waste not into wealth, but into social wealth. And there's a huge difference, because what we're trying to do is to find ways and create partnerships and shift policies so that waste generates, helps people break out of poverty. And so for that, basically, we've really worked out two kinds of partnerships. And I think one of them is with the informal sector itself, and the other one, which has much more, a possibility to scale up is with the government. And challenging as it is, it's also yielded enormous results. So really briefly, I'll explain both of them. Firstly, with the informal sector, there is so much. We really wanted to partner with the intellectual and the entrepreneurial capital at the bottom of the pyramid, because you have all these people who really know the business of waste. Because if any of us got $1 and a bag and we were asked to survive, we'd have a really hard time. But these people do that. And we felt that it was important to build both our capacity and theirs. Because in a partnership, not both the partners may not really want the exact same things, and that's what happened to us. The waste pickers wanted more recognition, but first of all, they wanted less humiliation from the public. And we had to work on all that and work with the police in Delhi. So we worked with the police for 5 years doing a series of advocacy, research, training, and finally we got a bill passed. It's not really a bill, a government order passed, where in every district in Delhi, there was a nodal officer who has to specifically respond to waste pickers who are identified and bear identification cards from us or the municipality. Similarly, with the municipality, we worked for 1.5 years, and finally they started giving, along with us, identity cards to people like this, so that they kind of got legitimate. So when you have an identity card that is co-given by a government agency, then your policy locally changes. Similarly, for the New Delhi Municipal Council, we got a contract, which was a complete transformation of policy for them, to give us a contract to pick doorstep waste from the doorstep. And they said, oh, we don't think waste pickers can do it. And we said, well, give it to us and then you can scrap the contract if it doesn't work. And it's continued for several years now. So you have quite transformative things. The Delhi Master Plan, in a very incomplete way, they've actually allocated space for waste recyclers because of the advocacy that we did. And what we really did was we spent 2 years of research understanding how much space would you ideally need, how much space would the informal sector really need if it wanted to transact its business well. Because waste is a physical entity, even though waste recycling is a service. So you have to store it somewhere and all of that. But there's no, because it's informal sector, there's no space given to it. There's space for landfills, but there's no space for recycling. And therefore, we got some of that space. I'm not saying it was ideal, but it was the first time that a master plan actually looked at some of this. Our tactics were, obviously, we had protests. We had really big protests. We had a protest with 16,000 people at one point where we were all arrested. But at some point, we also got great media. I mean, we had support from, we got great media in the New York Times, in The Economist, in all of that. And so while there were street protests that we were trying to lead on one hand, we were also we were generating information and data and making sure that was in the public space and in the public domain and influencing public policy. And particularly our doorstep collection in the New Delhi area, where a lot of people who are really key policymakers lived. We use that as a way of outreach and forcing them to open their eyes and look at new possibilities. So I'll quickly talk about what we've done with government. And what we've really done is use the same model, create data, help them look at the realities. And we've done, for example, most of the new policy on climate change. Instead of just talking of climate change, it talks about the informal sector, and it specifically says they have to be included, and they have to be, and municipalities have to find ways to include them because they are reducing climate change, carbon emissions. And we've looked at most policies in the last 2 years, whether it's plastic. In fact, the new plastic policy says you have to include waste pickers for picking up plastic for recycling. So these are ways we've made these changes. And I will end talking really, and so actually when you say laws exist, for this sector of people, there were no laws, and we had to make them exist in order to get their jobs formalized. But I'll end on a really new policy that just came in on May 1st on electronic waste, old computers and televisions. India produces 13% of the world's e-waste. And the new law, for the first time, says that even an association, which is the way that most informal sector people like to organize themselves, because it's so easy to handle, even they have to be considered and given authorization, because you can't, hazardous waste cannot be handled if you're not authorized by pollution boards. And pollution boards say we will never authorize an association, because how can an association, carry on hazardous waste work? So we've, on one hand, trained all of these informal sector actors to collect electronic waste. On the other hand, we've got the law that legitimizes their form of organization, and the government now needs success on their law. So now the government is actually working and authorizing people across cities. Delhi, Chintan is the first organization to have got this, but there are many other informal sector organizations in the process, Bangalore, Pune. So we're suddenly going to see a whole new transformation of how cities can actually work with informal sectors, because there are new policies, and find new ways to live more sustainably.
Thank you.
And
Thank
so
you.
that's what we will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bharati. I should point out that the State Department of the United States has recognized Chintan's work with their first Innovation Award for the empowerment of women and youth, because it is a scalable model. As Manjeet started to explain in her presentation, the characteristics and dynamics of emerging market cities. There are solutions that are necessary, as necessary in Brazil as they are in India, for government to work together with a host of actors. And unfortunately, we don't have someone from the public sector here to defend themselves today, because I want to go a little bit deeper in this question of not demonizing government, right, but helping to try to build the capacity, whether it's through not breaking the law or maybe going around laws that don't work, changing laws that are outdated or just are not applicable, and specifically this case of creating new laws. And Manjeet, I wonder if I could kind of turn to you within the broader framework of what you've been doing with Gateway House, but where you feel the space is for that conversation.
The policy space?
Policy space.
Well, to begin with, actually, there's not a lot of research that is being done. And so India particularly business really has spent all their interactions with governments and mostly with lobbying. The citizen has been absent. And the way to work is really to start developing a culture of research that can just, and I think that Bharati will attest to this, because she started to do some research. It resulted in a law being created that the government then has to prove that they've done the right thing. And I think that is the correct path. So we need to develop a culture of research. Everything needs serious research instead of just lobbying and shortcutting, which is unfortunately the way that people have gotten used to doing, because life is moving at such a fast pace that no one has the time to stop and take the difficult road out. So that is one of the routes to start engaging with government, and also to get the government, policymakers have no time. They are so besieged with problems and the shortcuts that they don't even have the time to do the research. And the Planning Commission in India, which is the one that looks at all the big policies, we were at a meeting with them. They don't read anything that comes their way. And so how do you capture their time? They've got to farm it out to research institutes and really get the numbers and statistics so things can get done properly instead of on the fly.
Thank you. And not with your, you say it's small, but in my estimation, it's large for 214 cities rolling out these developments. This is something that you're, like the City Connect model, bringing the expertise to the government actors, whether it's at the city, state, or national level, or is it something that you're trying to develop a collaborative framework? What do you think is most effective?
Well, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's just it's a large subdivision. We buy land from the farmers, convert it, and put a master plan on it. If we can efficiently construct and sell at a profit, we do that. The challenge is the government doesn't provide the services, in the sense we build our own private sanitation, sewer, water within the perimeter. And the state, of course, delivers it to the perimeter, and then we build it internally. There is absolutely no role for the government in what we do, and desirably so. I think there is nothing positive that can be added from them, except that if they could add the services that we would not have to build, our cost of delivery would be lower. In effect, translating into a lower cost of the home for the end user. And this is the reason why land in India is so expensive. Why land in India is, and especially in all emerging markets, is so expensive is not because there are so many people. It's because the policies are a bottleneck. So for example, let me give you an idea. The whole, I don't know how many people are familiar with, for example, Gurgaon, which is a satellite city outside of Delhi, right?
Fastest growing urban area in India, if I'm not mistaken.
Possibly. I mean, I think it's 10 million. I don't know what the numbers are. It's about 2 or 3 million people today, and used to be nothing 10 years ago. But the point is that all real estate development or all urbanization in India is happening in municipalities that did not exist 5 years ago. And you know why that is? Because the existing municipalities are just ossified in policies that were created 50 years ago. Administrators who have no desire, no ability, no competence to govern, right? And an enforcement regime that is extractive, right? So I've been in meetings where, where the lieutenant governor of the city would say that, okay, these guys are running commercial operations out of homes, right? So we are going to go and seal their operations. And of course, this is the big thing that happened in Delhi over the last several years, right? And I asked him a simple question. I said, they're not running it out of there because they desire to, mix their residents with the commercial space. The reason is because there isn't a commercial space. And why is there insufficient commercial space in a city like Delhi? Oh, he said, we'll figure that out. Right now, they're breaking the law. I'm like, oh, okay. So, you can keep working on it from that perspective. So what happens? All development has been pushed out to the perimeters of the cities. So take any city. Take Bangalore, take Mumbai, take Delhi. There is no growth internally in the city, right? And that is a major vacuum. Nobody addresses that. Now, what happens with that? Now, for example, the new master plan of Delhi is talking about increasing the FSI as to the height restriction. They're taking away the height restrictions on how high you can go to build the residences. Now, that's taken several years to just pass. And it is such an obvious solution. I mean, India is one of the least dense countries in the world. So simple solutions, if there were one law that, one could perhaps lobby for the benefit of the country and not just for the private sector, is to make it FSI free, or to just, make it like by a multiple of 10 times. Say that if right now you can, let me give you an example, a real example. So when you buy an acre of land, well, you cannot buy an acre in Delhi, suppose in Gurgaon, let's say you pay $2 million for that 1 acre. What you can do with that is build 1.5 times. So that's 44,000 square feet. You can build approximately 75,000 square feet of space, right? Multiply that with 100, right? And multiply that then by 50%, because that's how much space you are left with to sell. So on a 100-acre township on which I have spent $200 million just to buy the land, I can only sell less than 1 million square feet, right? Now imagine what that means, or that translates into the cost of the delivered product. So all of it comes down to money. The point being that unless the price of land comes down, you cannot have an effective, affordable housing solution. You will always have slums. I mean, you will always have homes which are brilliant and $2 million a pop, which is what we're building. But if you really want to build something for, let's say, $100,000, $50,000, or $25,000, right?
Or less.
Or less, well, less, fair enough, less than $25,000. Right now, the solution that developers have is to find, so you go 40 kilometers outside of Delhi. But that's no solution, because then their livelihood is in the city.
We know that those solutions don't work. So we've seen that, the trying to marginalize the poor into the periphery doesn't work. So one consensus point that I've heard you all say is this uncertain future, right? We have different models that we're testing, we're trying to scale them. The City Connect model that's working for Bangalore, Chennai, and Pune, maybe it doesn't need to scale nationally and can just stay within its local centers, because we do need, like Chintan, the adaptable strategies that are completely locally based. I wonder if I can just ask both of you to reflect, Ravi and Bharati, on this idea of how do you scale? Do you need to scale the model, or can you develop it?
See, the thing is, I personally believe, even take an idea like City Connect, it's eminently scalable. I mean, tomorrow if you have 100 cities coming forward with local champions, the broad framework can be taken and you can run in the individual cities. In fact, I think that's more scalable. It's just that if people get the message, you have to decentralize, and you cannot have one master planner for India who will decide how this is going to happen. I firmly believe it's got to decentralize at the local city level, and people have to find, I keep saying this business about finding your own destiny and how you're going to get there. And that has to be a local initiative. And I think an idea like this is scalable, because it basically rests on the fact that people who live in a particular city finally care about fixing that city. And if you can creatively put together a framework and nurture that energy, it's possible. That's where I'm coming from.
Well,
Bharati?
I think you need to scale the principles rather than the model. So I think what works for me, or what I see in our sector, is that you use local models as a way to sell principles across, but then those principles translate into other local models.
Excellent. We have about 10 minutes left, and I think it would be great to get some questions from the audience. The translation is only for Chinese, if anyone needs it.
Hi, I'm Ravital, and I'm from Alcatel-Lucent. And I want to talk to you about something that you just said about marginalizing the poor into the rural in India. I just spent 5 months in India by default, studying something really new that we came up with, which is neo-urbanization. And what we saw, which was very, very interesting, is actually how the neo-urbanization, the new urbanization in India, which is in Gurgaon, which is near Gift in Gujarat, actually becoming a very prosperity towns. So the whole notion of city in India is actually changing. And the boundaries are really, really changing. And what we see transformation, what we call transformed rural, mega corridors, mega city which I don't like to use. And I think that the problem that we're dealing here is the change of the concept of the city.
Do you
So
have,
whatever-
can I ask you, do you have a question? Because we only have
No, so
10
I want to ask,
10
yeah,
minutes.
so
Great,
what I want
thank
to
you.
ask is, how are, if I'm now writing the paper for this, tell me how what you call the municipality now dealing with this transformation that we see of what we call city, that the city is not like what it used to be in India, and the transformation that we see in the last 15 years.
Thank you. Let's take 2 more questions and we can answer them all together, please.
Hi, my name's Fiona Strelitz. My name's Fiona Strelitz. I'm from London. I have a question for Annat. My question is, could you elaborate on what you mean by the government being extractive? Because that's something that I thought I heard when you described your developer activity, and the profit that you were making sounded pretty extractive to me. And secondly, if I understood correctly, are you talking about taking development outside the city to unregulated areas as a way of changing who leads the activity? Is it a transfer of power from democracy to the development activity and interest in an unregulated way?
Thank you. And then one more from this gentleman.
I want to thank the panelists for their frankness and candor. I have two townships under design, one in Punjab and one in Gujarat, and I understand exactly what you're facing there. Clearly, the question I have is, how do we get to a point where we would actually be able to have development decisions made open, fair, and equitable at the regional level? Because at this point, like I've been working in Bangalore as well, Karnataka has their thing, there's the transportation agency, there's Infosys, there's Westpro, all of those. So if you could possibly talk about how you think we could get to a point where we don't have a bad plan and badly administered. Half the students I have in my graduate program are from India, and their hunger is to do just that in India.
Thank you. So just maybe to recap, the first question, defining boundaries of the city. Manjeet, may I ask you to reflect on that relative to the capacity? We know that there's a lot of centralized power at the national level, but how do we build capacity at the local level?
One of the reasons that cities are really not great in India is because the municipal corporation, which is in charge of the city, is right at the bottom of the ladder. And they are totally not empowered, and nothing happens at that level. We have a very good bill in India. It's called the Nagar Raj Bill, which is basically, India has what they call Panchayati Raj for urban areas, where the urban village council is very empowered now in India. They need to do the same thing for the cities. And there's a bill that has been passed, very diluted form, that will empower citizen councils, small groups of citizen councils, to take charge of their immediate area in the city, and therefore really build up the city from the bottom up, because that's what works in India. It's a bottom-up approach. So that really needs to be passed in terms of security, healthcare, infrastructure, everything. That will work well, and it will take away the problems that businessmen are facing while trying to really develop the city in a creative way.
Thank you. Great. And now the second question is just all yours. The only thing I would like to add, this question of power sharing, power transference in developing the new townships. And we heard in the morning session a very broad strokes with specific reference to Lavasa. And we know the controversies that surround that project. But if you could elaborate on what kind of power sharing and authoritative kind of governing of these new townships you envision would be helpful.
So I think the first question was, are the profits excessive? Extractive.
Extractive.
Fair enough. So we are very simple people, you see. Our business is to make money. We're not there to transform the city. But I will bet you $1 that all cities around the world, all great cities, have been formed by people like me, putting together 1 million people like me and building great developments. no single planner ever sat down together and said, oh, I'm going to build a great city tomorrow. So cities are organic formulations that arise out of people like me trying to create the best that they can. And it so happens that today, the economic structure of the real estate industry in India is such that it allows for profits to be made. Now, I just described to you one end of the spectrum. If you saw all the things that one has to do to get to that, then you would not call it extractive, A. B, the government's role is extractive, and I call it that because it is not their business to make money. They're not in it to make money. They're in it to govern. The purpose of government is to enable for me to make money, not for the government to make money by forcing me to pay them to do what they're required to do free of charge. That is what is extraction, right? That is rapaciousness.
Isn't the question also about the reinvestment into the city, whether it's through these public goods of public space, cultural amenities, transportation and infrastructure that nobody ever wants to pay for? And I just want to push you a little bit in terms of the question about what is the responsibility of the private sector to reinvest, whether it's through the City Connect model or other models, to ensure that the quality of life is really there in India's cities. That, because I know that's a goal of yours.
Indeed.
You've said that. You want to raise the quality of life.
True. And that flows in with the question the gentleman asked over there, which is, what is the appropriate role of the municipal bodies when, in India today, so to speak, right? Let me give you another example. So in the town of Gurgaon, which is, I think, 2.5, 3 million people today as we speak, which grew in the last 10 years, I think the total number of fire engines over there until last year, take a guess, right? 1, okay? Take a guess on, how many ambulances you would have in the town, in the city of Gurgaon, right? None. So the point is, the municipal regime does not exist because the government, I'm just calling government with a capital G, and I don't mean to demonize the government as you say it, but the enabling environment and the incentivization is all screwed up right now, right? The only reason why development is happening is because there is a demand for a product which only the private sector is able to fulfill. And because there is nobody else who's able to do that, and doing it is so tough, is the reason prices are so high. Prices are so high not because we are making more money or we're charging more. Prices are high because the cost of land is so high, and the cost of land is so high because there's a policy bottleneck on what you can do with the land.
Great.
Right? I'm telling you that you could cut down the price of my product by, down to 25% if the government were to allow me to build 10 times more on the same acre, as opposed to creating India into an overgrown slum. The reason why India is now an undifferentiated slum is like a sprawling mall. Like you go out from a city to city, you have to go out because you cannot go high. That's a separate question.
Okay,
But
can
your
I,
point,
just
and-
because we're running out of time and I want to get to the third question, and maybe we can get 5 more minutes and go over a minute.
Yeah, just one last, just so that I can complete that thought, which was, I don't mean to make it sound that, to your point, that we're not responsible, right? If you were to come visit what we are doing, right, we are creating in that 100-acre township, right, there is a hospital, there is a school, right, there's a cultural space, there are parks, 45% of the space is open, like is green, right? And then you've got and then on top of that, we layer the relationship so that you can actually create an environment, which I would wager is better than 99% of the urban environments that exist today in middle-income towns in India.
So I think the last question was really important and gets to an issue that we said we've talked about and we haven't actually that much, which is civic participation, and this idea of open city making, right? And I'm, take wherever your decision, your personal preference is on who decides. The fundamental issue is it needs to be a collective decision making, and whether that's at the city level, the regional level, or the state, national. If I could ask, just in concluding thoughts for you both to reflect on that and the mechanisms for engaging the world's largest democracy.
Well, I mean, as we all know, the world's largest democracy is pretty ephemeral and fragile, but our work is to make it more robust. And I think there are a couple of key mechanisms. I think government per se, the institution of the bureaucracy of municipalities, I think is really important because people like us in civil society organizations are constantly working and advocating with them to play from the quarter of the poor and the marginal, who aren't organized enough yet, who don't have eloquent spokespeople like yourself, to explain themselves and to advocate for themselves. And so we think really a large part of civic participation is get government in your corner, get them to kind of see things from your point of view, because otherwise we're going to have a really, really, really unequal spaces.
Thank you.
So my concluding thoughts are the following, and I'm also addressing all the questions and what he answered. Of course, I don't agree with him. Let me just state that for the record. We'll discuss it later. You mentioned Gurgaon. Gurgaon is a classic example of how the private sector can really extract stuff and not do the right things. The place just doesn't work. I mean, it might be, we'll come to that separately. But just starting with that, if I see the roadmap, it's really, you need to fix the urban governance, which is the third tier of local government has to get strengthened. You need more powers. Actually, the state needs to let go. And the big challenge here, as I see it, we all, as management students, think of systems theory. There's this elegant thing about, if only this thing happened, that happened, all this stuff worked together, we'd have great outcomes. I think in the real world, we all have to master more what I would call modified game theory. We need to understand what are the incentives, motivations of the different players, and you got to figure out how to make it happen. So some of us who are trying to do this, if I want a more empowered third tier, actually we are trying to, in our limited way, address some of the younger politicians and political parties, because we really need a bipartisan consensus for more power in the third tier of government. Those guys are waiting to get to 60, 65 before they have meaningful role in their political parties. We have a geriatric leadership. So what strikes some of us is that if you can have the local leadership starting at the corporation level and work their way through regional and national level, that's a career path for those young politicians. Get them on your side to try and get this thing for the third tier of local government. In terms of what he mentioned about the development plan, etc., some of us who have worked in this space, we believe over a period of time, the region has to be viewed as the larger city. A set of clusters with good connectivity, high-speed connectivity, and that has to work. It's not just about greater Chennai or greater Bangalore, but it's a larger regional area. But for that to happen, government tends to think in terms of districts and boundaries in a particular way. These tend to cut across those conventional districts and boundaries. So we need new thinking in government. How will I have a system where there are some overarching rules that work across the region, but you respect locally elected leaders who have their place under the sun?
Thank you.
That's what we need to do.
Excellent.
And lastly, I just want to mention, I'm part of helping some people, again, pro bono, on an idea called, 100 acres is a gated community. This idea is about sustainable development zone, 1,000, 2,000 acres, which go across panchayats, which has a high development zone, which is just 40 acres out of that 2,000 acres. And then it has social areas, low-cost housing, and thing. And you build a structure where the 1,000 acres, the people who are outside the high development zone who own land, gain an upside in perpetuity from what happens to that area. And the high development zone can have an FSI of 4 or 10 or 15. But the profits of that, in some sense, go back to the community, which is helping that area grow by keeping themselves as no development zones or low development zones or low-cost housing.
Thank you.
That's the thing. Thank you.
I think Manjeet had one final thought, and then we'll wrap up.
One final thought is that the politicians that you talk about actually need to be us. And so when the middle class enters politics, that's when things are really going to start to change, because our vision will start to dominate. And the good news is that in Bombay, you have people like us, professionals and business people, entering politics for the first time. And earlier this year, Bombay has 227 wards. We got citizen candidates for all 227 wards. 226 lost, but my candidate from my ward won. And so we are trying
Local
to create
politics.
an ideal space in our little area that can then fan across the city.
It's an
That's a good
excellent point.
example.
I hope we got to some of the granularity of what defines urban India today, and thank you for joining us, and thank you again to our panelists.